So people who are kind of traditional direct marketers or publishers or just analytic people in general are really used to managing metrics. And most people who set up mail programs are deeply concerned with metrics like pass along and open rate and click-through rate and other things that drive the health of your program, drive your signups, drive your page views, drive your ad dollars, ultimately drive conversions. And if I had to leave everyone with one message tonight, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the specifics of deliverability, it's that you should manage your email reputation like it is a core metric, just like an open rate or a click rate. It should be on your KPI dashboard. It should be something you think about. So however you monitor it, whether it's through us or any of the other services out there, think of your email reputation as something that you need to fiercely protect and that you need to manage very aggressively upward because it has a direct correlation with how much of your mail gets into inboxes and how much of its images are working, and all of that drives commercial behavior at the end of the day and viral behavior as well. So in terms of managing your deliverability, the bad news is that it's more complicated than it should be. And I think as Dan said at the beginning, it's a little bit of a black box for everyone. And that's unfortunate. And there are a lot of reasons why, not the least of which is that there's no post office for the internet, right? So every receiving network in the world is free to do whatever it wants with email. So they all have a different cocktail of filtering software and blacklists and whitelists and throttling mechanisms and MTAs. So it's a little, bounce codes for that matter. It's a little challenging to navigate that. But fundamentally, the problem is that if you're looking at any of the statistics from the anti-spam vendors, about 95% of all email in the world is spam. So my estimate, which I came up with the guys from Yahoo and Hotmail, is that this year, or 2009, I guess was when we did this, there were approximately 75 trillion emails sent in the world. That's a pretty big number. Usually when you hear trillion, all you think about is the US deficit. So 75 trillion emails sent in the world in 2009, and 5% of them were good. And what that means is if you're the guy at AOL or Hotmail or Gmail and you're working the dials, right, your job is to block 71.25 trillion emails to protect your members' inboxes. And that's job one for you. Then you have job 2, 3, 4, and 5, and somewhere down on like job 10 is make sure that you're not blocking and filtering the 3.75 trillion emails that you shouldn't, because you figure you're doing a reasonably good job at it. Most of them are getting through anyway. So the reason deliverability ends up being tough is that it's just not a priority for the people who are in charge of filtering. And at the end of the day, there are a lot of things you can do excuse me, to control your destiny around email deliverability. And that's really the good news. It is nearly 100% in your control. I say nearly because a lot of this is done by machines. Accidents happen. Rules change. Sometimes it's a little hard to adapt. But for the most part, the factors that drive filtering are largely in control of the sender. I think the handout has these. I'm not sure if they correlate exactly to what I'm about to say, but they'll certainly be directionally the same. There are, I would say, 6 centers of excellence for email deliverability that, again, you work the dials if you're the guy that's sending the mail or the gal that's sending the mail. Probably the most important one is complaints. The single thing that every ISP looks at when they make filtering determinations is how many complaints is this mailer driving. And they look at it both in terms of the ratio of complaints to mail sent, or actually complaints to mail delivered. So complaint rate is an important thing. But they also just look at raw number of complaints. So you can have a really good complaint rate, but if you're sending billions of emails, at some point, someone at Yahoo is going to say, I don't care if the complaint rate is only 1%. 1 million of my customers just complained about this mail. 10 million of my customers complain about this mail. And all of a sudden, their hair's on fire, and you get blocked. So raw number of complaints and complaint rates are absolutely critical. There are a lot of different techniques to deal with complaints. Quite frankly, the best one is to send good stuff. Send things that people who sign up for your list want to get. Obviously, the way you capture addresses and put addresses on your list, the way you handle permission, how long it is between when someone signs up and when they get their first message, how your emails are designed and look, all those things are important. But at the end of the day, it's really about relevance. If people are signing up to get X and you send them X, you are unlikely to get a lot of spam complaints. So complaints are number one thing to manage in terms of email deliverability. The second thing, which is probably the most difficult to manage, is what's called spam traps. So spam trap addresses are essentially email addresses which should not be receiving email. And there are a couple of different flavors of spam trap addresses out there. Some of them are more evil than others. But most ISPs and filtering software packages look at all of them the same way. And the best way to protect against spam traps ending up on your list is to do a confirmed opt-in process. Let me explain what I mean by that, because a lot of people have a lot of different definitions for confirmed opt-in. It doesn't mean that you necessarily have to do double opt-in and require someone to proactively reply to your confirmation email or click on your confirmation email. A lot of people have religion about that. We don't. There's some businesses where that might make sense. There's some where it doesn't. But what I mean by confirmed opt-in is when someone signs up for your service, send them an email immediately. Give them an opportunity to say, oh, no, I didn't mean to get that. And make sure the email doesn't bounce. So someone who signs up for an email address that comes into your database where you mail immediately and it bounces, chances are there's something wrong with it. It could be a typo, but it could also be a spam trap address. The second technique for dealing with spam trap addresses is just good regular list hygiene. If someone bounces 3 times, 2 times, whatever the right rule is for your mailing cadence, take them off your list. Don't keep trying and trying and trying and trying and trying. And don't mail addresses that have been lying around for 12 months and haven't been touched. All of those things can prevent a spam trap problem. One of the other centers of excellence is around infrastructure. And what I mean by infrastructure is essentially the configuration and the security of the server that you use to send email. One of the reasons that so many young companies are now flocking to services like Isaac's, like SendGrid, is that he deals with infrastructure for you and does it very elegantly and in a very cost-effective manner. And there are a lot of companies that get tripped up on infrastructure without even meaning to. It's not that every single thing about infrastructure is too hard. It's that there are a lot of them and there are a lot of moving pieces. Configuration settings change when something on the server changes, and making sure that you're following all the best practices. You're authenticating through multiple authentication protocols. You've closed your proxies. You've closed your relays. You have reverse DNS enabled the right way. All those things are critical to making sure that when your server connects to the ISP's server, it looks like a good guy server and not like a bad guy server. The last kind of center of excellence I would talk about is stability. And what I mean by stability is the stability of you as a sender and the stability of the mail that you send. No better way for an ISP to think you're a spammer than for you to decide that you're launching your email program on Tuesday and sending out 25 million messages. It's going to come from an IP and a domain they've never seen before, they've never heard of before, or worse, it's recycled from someone else, and they're going to have no idea what it is. Even worse is to hop domains or to hop IPs. Right? If you're a single domain but you decide you're going to mail with this service provider, oh, you don't like what they're doing, next week you're going to mail from this service provider, then you're going to take it in-house. That sort of lack of stability is exactly how spammers behave. And ISPs will notice that and clamp down on it right away. So, again, as I said, the good news about all these things is they are largely in your control as the sender. The bad news is there are a lot of them to keep on top of. But that's sort of deliverability 101. And before I open things up for Q&A about any topic anyone wants to hear about, I wanted to tell everyone about something that we're doing at ReturnPath that's probably quite relevant for this group. We are probably 2 weeks away or 3 weeks away from launching a program that we're very excited about for startups. So our services can tend to be a little bit expensive. They're expensive because we provide a lot of value and we do a lot of work. But we've heard consistently from companies like yours that return path's a little bit too expensive. I'll just try to figure it out on my own. We were startup once ourselves, not too long ago, and not just myself, but a number of members of my executive team are very passionate about working in the startup community, mentoring and helping startups along. So we're going to be launching a startup program, not unlike the things that Microsoft and Sun have for startups, where you get their regular service or their regular hardware at a discount price if you qualify for it. We don't have a good name for it yet, although, quite frankly, I kind of like Startup2Startup as a name. It makes us feel young. And as I said, we're going to be launching this sometime in the next couple weeks. But since we were here tonight talking to this group, what I wanted to extend as an offer is, if any of you are running a service and you think you might be interested in this, we would love to get some early adopters on board. So the thing that you should do, if you are interested in that, is this man right here, who I will ask to stand up right now. Chad Malco is our VP of North American Sales and Service. He's based here in the Bay Area. And that man over there is John Rousseau, who's our VP of Marketing, who's based in New York, although he too is a Silicon Valley guy displaced to the East Coast. Either of them or I will be happy to take your business card, and we'll put you on the list. And as soon as we get our act together in the next couple weeks, you'll be the first people we contact. So feel free to grab any of us at the end this evening and let us know if you're interested. So with that, I'd be happy to talk about anything that's on anyone's mind. Maybe I guess I've stunned everyone into silence. Yes, in the back.
Any thoughts of the impact to the email ecosystem due to Facebook's changes today to basically let applications and third-party developers have access to email addresses?
So the question was, what do I think the impact is going to be to the email ecosystem of Facebook's decision to allow third-party developers to access their email database. So I had just heard about this earlier today for the first time and I haven't had as much time to let it marinate as I normally would like. My guess is, the answer to most of these things is it depends. I'll come back to sort of my cardinal principle about deliverability, which is a lot of it's about complaints. So if third-party developers are accessing those email addresses and using them without permission, or feeling like, hey, I have permission because there's some privacy policy somewhere that said I have permission, they will run into problems. If third-party developers access those email addresses and have real permission and send great mail, and you can get permission in a lot of different ways, then it probably won't be that much of a problem. But some of it also depends. I don't know exactly how the mechanics work in terms of who sends the mail and where it comes from. I can guarantee you one thing. Facebook is a big client of ours. They're not going to send the mail for you, or if they do, it's certainly not going to come out of the same pipes that send their transactional messaging and their confirmation messaging. So I would encourage anyone who is a developer of an app on Facebook and accesses those addresses, not only to make sure that you're feeling good about who you're emailing and what you're sending to them, but that you're doing it the right way. And if Facebook says, hey, you can just sort of send it out through us, unless you have no other choice, you may want to think twice about that and make sure that you're using a really solid infrastructure to get the mail out. Yep.
Think about the email that you send as a site as being high risk of being perceived as spam versus low risk of being perceived as spam. That is one dimension.
Yep.
And the other dimension being highly important to your business objectives versus less important to your business objectives. And you can group these categories of email on the same IP addresses or on different IP addresses. What strategy would you recommend for?
Right. So the question, just to make sure everyone heard it, was if you have different kinds of email as a business, some of it's more important than others. Some of it is more likely to be perceived as spam than others. How do you think about different IP addresses and sending mail out from different places? So segmentation of IPs is a best practice. It's something that we recommend that our clients do. Although that is changing a little bit over the next couple of years in terms of how to think about it. But in terms of today's mail, IP segmentation is pretty critical. Because you don't want the stuff that's good, high value, high importance, to get washed away in in a spam filter because it's coming out of the same place that the other mail is coming from. So different mail streams will have different complaint rates. They will have different characteristics, and IP segmentation is one way to deal with that. There are some things that you have to be careful when you're doing IP segmentation because, one thing you don't want to have is all of one kind of mail get blocked because an ISP figures out, well, that's all the bad stuff coming from XYZ company. Even that mail you still have to make sure is locked down and is as relevant as possible, and you're managing complaint rates and unsubscribes and things pretty proactively. I think every scaled client we have does some form of IP segmentation. The thing that is changing over the next few years, and a lot has been written about it lately, and it's not changing overnight, is that increasingly ISPs are starting to look at domains as opposed to IPs. So if all your mail is coming out of the same domain, 5 years from now, it may not matter if you're spreading it across 28 different IPs. You're going to have a domain reputation. And it's totally unclear what that world's going to look like and what's going to happen between now and then. But given that there is a slow transition underway, it means that monitoring domains and IPs and the overlay of the two is going to start to become important. So I am guessing that within the year, we will start advising clients on domain segmentation or subdomain segmentation, and then also on IP domain overlays. But it's important to manage all that stuff. Yeah, in the back.
So my question's on the pivots that you had in your business.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think you would have arrived at your current business if you hadn't been in all 5 earlier?
Yes, we only had to be in one of them. So we only had to be working with customers on their email programs in some way and asking them a lot of questions and learning from them.
Okay, so you didn't necessarily need to spread yourself that thin.
No. No, I mean, what that did in the end effectively is it had a portfolio effect, right? So we had 5 businesses, one of them worked better than the other ones. But the way we got ourselves into the business that worked at the end of the day was that we had a lot of customers doing a lot of things with email, and we just kept asking them questions. What else can we do for you? What are your other pain points? What are your nice to haves versus your need to haves? What other vendors do you work with? How much do you pay them? Who do you like? Who do you not like? Yeah.
My company sends subscription billing notices out for a lot of other companies on their behalf to their subscribers. Is there anything we should watch out for? Or what can we do to make sure that our notices sent from our web service get delivered towards their domain?
Let me think about that for a second. So I'm, despite the last 20 minutes of talking, I'm not actually the technical expert in this field. So if you are sending, so the question was, this gentleman is operating a service that sends update notices, billing notices on behalf of other companies. And are there special things they need to do to make sure that the mail gets delivered? The answer to that is yes. So what you have to think about is who the end user has a relationship with and who they're expecting to get mail from. If it's not you, the mail should not look like it's coming from you. Otherwise, it will get marked as spam. You also have to make sure if you're mailing on behalf of other brands that you're authenticating properly. So if you're using someone else's domain or a subdomain, you have to make sure that the SPF records and the DKIM signing work properly so that it, in fact, is coming from that company. It's just coming from your pipes. I'm not sure I have a better answer to that. Isaac, do you have a better thought on that?
Yes.
I did okay. Okay. Yeah.
Is there any way to distinguish between email that gets delivered to a chunk, the junk file, versus email that gets delivered and actually read?
So there are two different questions. So the question was, is there a way to distinguish between email that gets delivered to a junk folder and email that gets delivered and read? Which I would say is actually two different questions. So the first is there a way to distinguish junk folder placement from inbox placement? And then the second is there a way to figure out if it was read? Because plenty of things make it to the inbox and actually never get opened or read. The best way to track if something gets read is a little challenging. You can certainly track open rates with pixels. That is an imperfect science for a lot of reasons. but that may be the best way to track whether something got read or not. The question of whether something ended up in an inbox or a junk mail folder, or quite frankly blocked and never showing up at all, the best way to do that is to do what's called seeding your campaign. So that's one of the things that our software application does, but there are other places you can get that tool on the web as well. They're not as cool as we are, but essentially when you mail your 25,000 customers or your 10 million customers, also mail accounts that either you control or you can have reporting level access to at services like ours, which actually go in and retrieve things out of specific folders and report back to you where they ended up. So you can do that on your own, right? You can send 10 emails to different AOL accounts that you have, 10 emails to different Gmail accounts. At some point, it gets a little cumbersome if you're trying to track hundreds of domains in different geographies, and if you're trying to scoop all that stuff in and figure out which campaign is associated with which email, the complexity does get there. But you can do a basic version of it on your own. Yeah?
So all these 6 points in your handout,
Yes?
they all make sense when you already have your initial point of contact, like they're a member of your site,
Mm-hmm.
they're using the service. How would you tweak it for invite emails? When you're kind of scraping people as you sign up for site, scrape your Gmail inbox, email your friends to join this new service.
You have to be really, really careful with that stuff. That is how a large number of social media companies end up really stubbing their toe with deliverability. Oh, sorry, yes. No, this is an important question. So the question is that the tips that we gave in the handout are all good and well, but how do you deal with basically invite a friend email? So you sign up for social media service X. They ask you to upload the address book, check off where you want the invitation to go. How do you deal with those emails coming out? So that's one of the most problematic mail streams anywhere. ISPs really struggle with what to do with it. And so there are a few things that are kind of best practices around that, and some of them they're all very consistent with the themes that I've talked about tonight. So one of them, that is something where you want to have segmented IP. Because you don't want that mail stream to pollute your confirmation emails or your transaction emails. That's like job one, absolutely. The second thing that you want to do is be really, really explicit with the mechanism for scraping addresses. So you want your new user, first of all, you want them to be a bona fide user, so you want them to have confirmed. And second, you want them to know exactly what they're doing. Are you sucking in their whole address book without them knowing about it? Are you taking it all in with all of the names unchecked and making them force check them? Take every precaution you can take to make sure that that person is really inviting the people that he or she wants to invite. I would say another pretty important best practice is the language in that email that goes out to the friend is pretty careful. You have to be pretty careful about that. I mean, the watchword around all of this is complaints and relevance, and you don't want to have anything that's even remotely deceptive. It's got to be pretty clear about what's going on with it. Certainly anyone that shows up on your list because they came from someone's address book, you should not be mailing them over and over and over again. You kind of have consent from your user to invite them, not to harass them, not to send them a lot of marketing messages. Those are a few things. Chad, do you have any other big ones we talk to clients about?
Just added to the whole complaints and bounces.
Yeah. So it's important. I mean, viral marketing is obviously a critical component of lots of new businesses. No one will say not to do it, but you do have to be just really, really careful about it. I would say, there is one other thing, which is you as the service provider should have limits. So there are people who have 5,000 addresses in their contact book. You should not be sending out 5,000 emails for someone. And in fact, some of the services, actually now that I'm thinking about it, one of the social media companies we actually advised to send them out in low doses. Someone so there's a limit of 100 per customer. Even that, they're only sending out 10 at a time, or 25 at a time, and monitoring what happens with them. So if they send out 25 and they're getting an abnormal number of complaints, don't even bother with the other 75. There's probably other stuff I could rattle off too, but that's a mail stream you need to pay particularly good attention to.
Just really simple question. What's like a good or reasonable email delivery?
So email delivery rate is, so the question is what's a good or reasonable email delivery rate? And what I will say is that email delivery rate is probably the single most maligned or confusing statistic out there, because a lot of different service providers take it to mean a lot of different things. So in terms of delivered, like how many successful mails were handed off from one server to another through an SMTP connection, that should be close to 100%. In terms of inbox placement, which is the statistic that we use for our clients, which is quite frankly the thing most people care about, right? If your mail got handed to another server and dropped on the floor, it doesn't do you any good. Inbox placement rate, I would say the typical company that doesn't pay attention to it, that's not sending out bad stuff, probably has an 80% inbox placement rate. The typical company that's sending out reasonable mail and paying attention to it should be 97 plus. Companies who are sending out, I won't call it bad stuff, but I'll call it gray stuff, even if they are paying attention to it, may only find that they have 20, 30, 40% of it showing up in inboxes. And they can potentially manage that up to 60 or 70% or 80%. It's probably never going to get above 80%. Because if your whole business is sending out third-party offers, you are going to have an extremely, extremely difficult time passing complaint rate thresholds at major ISPs, because your mail looks like spam. You may have taken every step in the book to comply legally with things. It may not be technically spam, but if it looks like spam, it's just going to get a high complaint rate from people. People forget that they sign up for that stuff. Yes?
How do the conditions differ and your advice differ for enterprise inbox placement versus consumer?
Honestly, they don't differ. So most networks, so the question was, do we think differently about B2B mail and B2C mail, basically? How do we think about deliverability into the enterprise versus a consumer ISP? There are some things that are different, but fundamentally the best practices are the best practices. And networks, whether they are AOL, Hotmail, Gmail, or xyz.com, frequently are using a lot of the same software to protect their networks. They may use a slightly different weighting or cocktail of it, but they're using similar kinds of whitelists, blacklists, and filtering solutions that have different algorithms, but they're all kind of looking at the same things. So B2B mail can be a little more challenging to monitor, but really, if you're doing right by the end, all of it is about doing right by the end user, and as long as you're doing that, you're optimizing your chances of getting placed in inboxes, no matter who's hosting the inbox. Yeah.
Can you say what good or average open and conversion rates are? I know you're dealing with deliverability, but I imagine you'll get CCNAs typically for different types of sites, say e-commerce, social network,
Right.
niche versus a mass market site.
So there is such an enormous range, even within each kind of site, that it's. The question was, are there norms around good open rates or good click-through rates or conversion rates? It's almost impossible to generalize. One of the things that confuses it is even sites in the same vertical have different philosophies about targeting. So we have some clients in a given vertical who send the same message to every customer, and they're good brand, and they don't get high complaint rates, so they keep getting delivered, but they don't have a good targeting and segmentation strategy, and something like that. Yeah, they'll be happy with a 1% click rate or a 2% click rate. We have clients who would be in the same vertical who they're happy to send an email to 3 people if they think there's a high propensity of converting, and they'll do campaigns that have 40% click through or 50% click through on a much smaller base. So. Unfortunately, there aren't a lot. I'm sure there's an average out there, but it's probably a useless statistic. But it might be. If you wanted more specifics, I would say either chat or I can probably talk to you about the thing that you're doing and give you some comps on it. Yeah.
One more.
Yeah. One more. Okay. One more.
What do you guys think about? What do you think about Google Wave or future email landscapes?
So what does the future of email look like? I will tell you one thing about it, which is every year there are a minimum of 20 articles or high-profile blog posts written about how email is dead. And every year, email gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It is, it's hard to say what the future of messaging is going to look like when you think about things like Google Wave. It's not just email, it's kind of messaging and collaboration. Everything that we see, the line is still going up and to the right. The 2 things ago, it was that RSS was going to kill email. It was going to kill commercial email. Well, that didn't happen. RSS, there's a lot of RSS adoption, but email's still growing pretty nicely. And then everyone said social media was going to kill email. Everyone was going to just message themselves on these closed platforms. But guess what runs all these platforms? It's email, right? The biggest emailers in the world are the social networks. So it's hard to say what's going to happen in the future. I mean, email is such an embedded protocol at this point. It's not going to go away. Is it possible it's going to change over time? Is it possible that there are going to be innovations? I know there's one seed camp company here tonight called Quagga, which is doing some really interesting things around managing the inbox and letting you think about email in a different way, prioritize it in a different way. Things like Zobni. There are things that are going to change and kind of optimize behavior around email. But it's hard to say. It's hard to see something in the near term that's going to clock it. So. I was told that was it, although I only see one other hand up, so I don't know if you're willing to give.
It better be a really good question. John, you're double dipping. Good.
Okay. So do you have any recommendations for bounce processing? You mentioned, if it's a hard bounce, dump that email. Obviously, that email that didn't exist 4 years ago could exist now because someone could register it. Let's say you just don't ever send email a hard bounce. What about soft bounce? How many do you send before you give up? At what frequency? Discuss.
So the question is the lively topic of bounce processing, which is kind of how do you know when to give up on an email that's bouncing repeatedly, that's not a user unknown or something, permanent fatal error kind of bounce code. As with most things, the answer is it depends. And it depends on your mailing frequency. So you shouldn't change the way you mail just because of something is bouncing. If you have a daily newsletter, that's very different than if you have a quarterly newsletter. So if you have a daily newsletter and you're getting a soft bounce, you can probably let it go 5 times, 8 times, 10 times. If you're sending something out once a quarter, you start to get really dicey about even going to 2. So honestly, the thing to measure if you're using senderscore.org or any reputation service is your bounce rate and measure it against statistical norms. How many you may be able to let a soft bounce go 25 times if you have such a low bounce rate that you're below everyone's threshold on it. So the best thing you can do is just look at the metric and look at it relative to benchmarks. Sorry, it's not such a fun answer, but it wasn't such a fun question. I'm just kidding. I love bounce processing.
Thanks very much, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, guys.